If you've been working on your trauma for a while and something still feels quite stuck or isn't moving, this video is about why that is probably happening. Because I'm going to talk about the kind of suffering that doesn't show up on the outside. This is the kind of suffering when you're functional, you get through the day, but in certain moments, it feels like you just disappear. It could be when your boss is talking to you, there's some conflict, and suddenly you're just somewhere else, or someone that you care for is asking you, "How are you doing?" And for a split second, you feel put on the spot and your mind goes numb and you can't find your words. And so all you say is, I'm fine, even though something inside of you is absolutely not fine. If this feels familiar, this video is for you because I'm going to talk about freeze and dissociation. And if you've ever wondered why you go blank, numb, shut down, even after years of therapy or working on yourself, this may explain more than anything you've heard. And there's four key things that we're going to cover today. So let's start. Number one. The first is the difference between freeze and dissociation. A lot of people in the trauma world use these words as if they mean the same thing. Yes, they overlap, but they're not identical. Freeze is primarily a physiological survival response. It's what the body does when it perceives that there's a danger and there's no way to fight against it or safely get away. And in those moments, the thinking often narrows, movement gets hard, we can feel trapped, collapsed, or that our body just won't do what we want it to do. That's freeze. Dissociation is different. Dissociation is more psychological and it's about disconnection from your experience. So instead of just the body becoming still, our sense of self, presence, time, memory, feelings, reality itself can begin to fragment or fade. We might start to feel like we're far away or numb, foggy, unreal in some way, feeling like we're detached from our body and feelings like we're watching ourselves from a certain distance. So freeze is more about the body's defensive physiology. Dissociation is about awareness, pulling away from what's happening. And to be absolutely clear, when I say awareness, I'm not using it in an abstract philosophical way. I mean, awareness is your capacity to feel, sense, notice, and stay present with your experience. That includes your body, your emotions, what's happening inside of you. And in trauma, your awareness, that awareness does not disappear, but it can narrow, it can fragment. That brings us to point two. If dissociation happens to you now, especially in moments when you are technically safe and you recognize that, it usually has a history. And the history is that your system built this pattern to solve a very old problem. How do I survive this? Our system is not built to solve the problem of how do I stay connected to myself? How do I remain fully present? Our system is built to how do I get through this? So if you were a child and you were frequently frightened, overwhelmed, emotionally alone, if you had a caregiver that was unpredictable, invasive, frightening, or not available enough, there were probably no real fight or flight options. There was no way to escape. So your system automatically did what it does. It reduces contact. That can look like stillness, collapse, disconnection, leaving. A lot of trauma responses make no sense if we judge them by adult logic, but they make perfect sense if you understand them as adaptive responses to overwhelm. And there's science behind this. When our brain perceives threat, the parts involved in language, reflection, and conscious choice often become less available. Survival systems take over much faster than conscious thought. So if you've ever had the experience or thought to yourself, I knew I was safe, but my body did not act like it, I froze or I dissociated, this makes total sense because trauma responses are driven by our implicit survival learning. Our body does today based on what it learned to expect from the past, especially from our early life experiences. So if being close at one time meant being overwhelmed, or if conflict meant danger, or if being seen meant you were going to be shamed, your nervous system may still react now as if those old conditions are still here, even though they're not. Point number 3. And this is where it really becomes painful, because if you don't understand this, you'll almost always turn it against yourself. Freeze and dissociation are often invisible. Fight looks dramatic, flight is obvious, we leave. But freeze and dissociation, they can look like silence, passivity, niceness, going along, blankness, emotional flatness, not knowing what you feel or need. And because these states are so misunderstood, they often get mistaken for personality. People think, oh, she's detached. She's cold, she's weak. He's avoidant, he's standoffish. But what they're looking at is a nervous system that learned to survive by disappearing. And because this is so misunderstood, we also end up judging ourselves for the very thing that once protected us. We think, oh, I should have done something different in that situation with my boss. I should have spoken up with that friend. I should have left that relationship. I should have known better. But that judgment comes from the part of you that is looking back with more capacity than you had in the moment. The nervous system you had in those moments did not fail. It protected you with the options it had. And often those options were painfully limited. So here's one of the most important things I've come to understand in my over 2 decades of working with trauma. Trauma does not only live in what happened, it also lives in what had to go offline in order to survive what happened. That's very different. It's not just in the fight or flight. The freeze and dissociation are not an absence of something happening. It's not an absence of experience. They are where the experience is still being held, preserved, like amber that hardens around something that couldn't be moved through at the time. And this is why you can understand your history intellectually and still have the same triggers, still go blank in conflict, still feel shut down in intimacy. And this brings us to point number 4, the part that most healing conversations still don't talk about enough. What actually helps? A lot of trauma educators talk about more regulation, release what's stuck in your nervous system. And yes, those things matter, particularly for the freeze response, but they're not the whole picture. Because what needs healing is disconnection. And more regulation is not enough to reach these dissociated, disconnected places. What's really needed is contact, a special kind of contact. There's actually 2 aspects of this contact that I have found. One is what I call embodied awareness. Not awareness as watching yourself from a distance. That can actually still be a kind of dissociation. I mean the kind of awareness that can be in real contact with sensation, emotion, impulse, vulnerability, and the presence of others without having to leave. It's being with what these parts have been protecting, and that matters enormously. What begins to melt these associated places is the light of awareness and embodied connection touching what has been living in the dark. And this is why talk therapy alone doesn't fully reach these layers, because these frozen, disconnected places in us are not waiting for a reframe or a better idea. They are needing a different kind of experience, a lived one. So here's the second aspect of this contact, and it can be really hard to accept, especially if you're someone who does a lot of work on your own. Freeze and dissociation are here because the support that should have been here wasn't. And so the nervous system learned, when something gets overwhelming, I will be alone with it. And if that was the learning, then it makes sense that even today, as you get close to those trauma places, something in the system is still saying, No one is going to be here for this. I need to leave. And that is often the place where our healing stalls. Some part of our nervous system only reorganize through new lived experiences. And this is why healing needs relationship. Not because therapy or group work is magic, but because what our nervous system learned in earlier toxic relationships, it has to unlearn in present moment, healthy, safe relationships. This can look like being supported to meet what's living in that dissociation. And as you come into contact with it, maybe there's fear, a deep sense of aloneness, a tightness in your chest, shame. And instead of having to go somewhere else to survive it, someone is really there for you. You're not alone, helpless, powerless. And this is profoundly corrective, right to our core. That's what changes things. And here's what I want to really leave you with. The part of you that learned to leave, the part of your system that learned to leave, to dissociate, to freeze. I know that feels like a loss, like something in you broke or got left behind. But that's not the whole truth. Because underneath all of this, there is something deeper that never left. And I want to say this carefully because I don't mean it in a bypassing way. Your deepest capacity for awareness never got damaged. Your access to it may have narrowed. Freeze and dissociation are real, but they were never the whole of you. There is nothing fundamentally broken in you. And healing is about recovering access to this deeper spaciousness, the capacity in you to witness, to be present, to be in relationship. It's always been there, just underneath the survival response, waiting for it to be safe enough to come home. And this is why I care so much about relational healing. What I'm describing is something that can actually be lived. And if you are wanting relational embodied healing, this is what I offer in Path of Love. It's a week-long immersive group. We need this kind of container. So these patterns don't stay abstract, so that the freeze, the dissociation, the protection, the shame, and the true longing of your heart can all show up. And instead of having to manage it alone, you are supported inside a field of relationship, presence, and honest emotional work. This matters because healing deepens when we can return and reclaim the conditions that trauma interrupted. Conditions like safety, attunement, truth, real contact, repair, and being safely seen. So if that calls to you, there's a link below. Thank you for joining me here. Always know that the door back to yourself is real, and you do not have to walk through it alone.